Okay, there he is.
There he is.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
You're 5 by 5.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Justin. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, David. And I want to say up front is that of all the years on Facebook, I think I've only connected and talked to anyone live probably 4 or 5 times.
Wow. Oh, me too. Me too. Yeah, it's very rare. Are you a Tibetan Buddhist or?
The practice is, let's see, it's from Tibet originally. And in my healing practice, it's known as Hamni Buddhism, which is lightning Dharma. The translation is to heal instantly, whatever the issue is, food, air, water, body, spirit.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I did Buddhist practices for decades and
Wonderful.
met the Dalai Lama in Tibet and I mean in India, in Dharamsala. And you know, now I have a very unique practice that for me has really been working really well. So tell us about your career as a nurse first, just a little bit in your background and how you shifted to a new way of looking at healing.
Well, a funny thing happened on the way to life. Actually, in the 80s, I learned to become an auto technician, been a machinist, I've been a model maker, and worked at Mattel Toys for a while, building toys. And
toys, wow, my kids would love you.
And I had volunteered at a Boys and Girls Club, and so I started making wooden toys, you know, little airplanes and spaceships, and I graduated to Star Wars toys, and then Learjets, and then wooden Porsches, Ferraris, Lamborghinis. I ended up doing a Humvee in wood for Arnold Schwarzenegger, so hold the cigars and everything. I did a pickup truck for the president of Toyota and other people out there. I did one car, went all the way to the president of Porsche. So I became very good at what I did, but one thing was always missing out of the picture is like working with people. I love to be able to make things and create things, of which I still do. So in '88, after being in the world of engineering and design for a number of years, I felt this calling. And I was encouraged by my then girlfriend, Susanna, to consider doing massage therapy. And I thought, okay, it was a good idea, and took the class down in San Diego, California. And it just was like a second nature to me. As I was working on people on the table, they would just go out. And Annie Benefield, the teacher, came up to me and she looked at me and she said, how long have you been doing massage? And I'm working on someone, and I look up at the clock on the wall, and I do the calculation in my head, and I said about 4 days, 3 hours, and 20 minutes. She just went completely quiet. She says, oh my God. And she'd been in the field for like 25 or 30 years. And she said to me, I've known people that are doing massage their whole life, and they haven't reached the level of connection that you're demonstrating here in class. And at the time, I go, wow, that's cool. And it just kept going. You know, it didn't really dawn on me that this gift that I had that was latent could be brought out. And so I took a detour, ended up from the massage therapy, meeting a nurse. She said, well, if you can do this, why don't you go into nursing? And so I did, got into the field, ended up at the Long Beach Veterans Hospital for 5 years, and got to see the best and worst of medicine and how the people there, and I'll say this, of all the people I worked at the VA, they were very dedicated to all the patients and people. I had one guy going back all the way to World War I.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this guy was 101 in 1995.
Wow.
So,
wow.
not
yeah, World War I ends in about 1918, and it's interesting because the Spanish flu, what they call the Spanish flu, started literally right after the miracle of the sun at Fatima, Portugal, on October 13th, 1917. And there wasn't a miracle of the sun. It was a miracle between the sun and the recipients, because the rest of the planet didn't have a phenomenon of the sun. But that's right when it starts. It starts in January. I mean, those are the first notable cases, but a virus doesn't just appear. It has an incubation period. And then, of course, it killed 50 million plus people worldwide. And it's funny, this morning on CNN, they said it killed 5 million people, but it's, if you look on the CDC, it killed 50 million people.
Oh, and you know what the extent was, and to think I was talking to someone who had lived through all of that.
Yeah, World War One, yeah.
World War One, lived through World War Two. Again, in '97, he was 101, so he was born in 1896. And so, as part of that whole adventure, he actually was in the cavalry on horseback.
Wow.
Before they had a militarized, automobile army.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, part of the story is, which I really found fascinating, is that he rode horses into Mexico under Blackjack Pershing, chasing Pancho Villa.
Wow, wow, wow.
Wow, what a story, what a resource. And that's what I loved about being at the hospital. However, sadly, they had a privacy policy, so I couldn't record him, I couldn't write it down. And here was this living legacy of those individuals that at that time, I think there was less than 100 men left in the whole country that had lived through World War One. And he was there receiving a then medal of all things from Bill Clinton.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing. So you started out, I mean, making toys and super high-end model cars, and then you become a nurse, you work in the VA, and you worked with a lot of veterans. And there's probably a lot of post-traumatic trauma vets that you dealt with. And how would a post-traumatic vet, would they get massage therapy? Would they get any kind of loving touch or rebalancing of the nervous system? And
well, this was now the mid-90s, and so massage was still considered kind of a new thing, even though it's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And having brought this up at nursing meetings, they said, well, if you feel so inclined and you have the time and you want to do some foot massage or hand or something very simple, it would be okay. However, it wasn't like they then thought about actually bringing a massage therapist in. That would have been amazing, whether they chose me or chose someone else. It would have been a big leap forward. Now, of most of the people that I dealt with were long-term geriatric, and the others were, usually we had them for 3 to 4 weeks in drug rehab. So it was always about just, in drug rehab, just getting people stable enough to stay off the street. On the other end, some of the patients were very, very fragile. So you kind of picked your battles of who you could work on or would be open to that or not. So most importantly, developed a connection to all the veterans, as my father was a veteran, my brother was a veteran, my uncle was a veteran. And so only through a twist of fate, I ended up not going into work, be in the Coast Guard. So it was part for me, it was serving those who served others. And I could have seen myself in the military as a corpsman. I could never see myself out there as a ranger shooting at people. So
yeah, I couldn't relate to that either. I mean, I was defense contractor, and we dealt with first landmine detection, then advanced bomb detection, and then medical detection. And we were actually trying to get contracts to get these alarms that can be placed all over the cities. And the second they detect a contraband, and that could be a virus, it could be a chemical biological agent, and it could be an explosive, the alarms would go off and notify everyone there's an emergency. And we approached the Department of Defense. We knew how to do it. They said, we don't need those. And of course, we would have needed those today, and it could prevent the vast spread of any type of a virus or threatening contagion. And also, I worked with, one of my first clients was a veteran. He was high-level military classified. He was so sick of being on his meds, and he wanted to use my frequency therapies. And his case was really, really amazing, because not only did I get him off all of his meds and he was stable, he started having visions. And he has this vision, and he tells me only 3 days before this happens that Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto is going to die in an explosion, in an attack. And I'm able to talk about it on a world-class radio show. And sure enough, 3 days later, somebody blew her up and she was dead.
Wow.
And this guy kept having these visions. And that's a thing. How far back does your spiritual practice go, and where does it integrate into your work?
Oh, wow. Well, I'll say this. The first vision I had, I was about 4 or 5 years old.
Mm-hmm. And what year were you born?
I was born in 63, so this was about 1962.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, there's been several things that have happened in my life that have led me to this point. I had my first out-of-body experience at 3.
Wow,
And,
you remember it. That's great that you can remember that.
oh, I was able to describe it in detail to my mother about 20 years ago. What happened was, it was in North Carolina. I'm actually born in North Carolina, and my dad was a Top Gun instructor in the Marine Corps. So we were stationed on the East Coast.
Right.
And back in the day, we didn't have these amazing stainless steel, wonderful, incredible barbecues. You made your own in the backyard with bricks.
Mm-hmm.
So the old school brick barbecue, there I was at 3 years old. I was climbing on it and doing just fine. But one of the bricks that I was climbing on, everybody's standing around. It was an afternoon dinner party. And one of the bricks pulled out, and I do a backward somersault off the barbecue and clip my neck on one of the sharp edges. So without missing a beat, my mom picks me up in her outfit and calls over to the neighbor, and he jumps in the front of the car, and they drive me to the hospital.
Were you unconscious?
Oh yeah, I was out. I was completely out. However, I was able to describe to my mother the inside of the car, the interior, what she was doing. It wasn't my dad, all these things about it. As I get goosebumps sharing the story, that I was out of my body. And when I told her this story years ago, she said, "How can you remember? You were unconscious." So that was like the first gateway, the first opening, the first break. And since that time, it was also around that most people go through the terrible 2s and 3s. I never had that year of like pure independence and screaming and being a kid, because I was pretty much comatose, I was having convulsions, all kinds of things was happening to this body of mine. And which is funny, I don't remember any of that, but I do remember being out of my body. Mm-hmm. So part of my journey has been healing all the issues and injuries that have occurred in this timeline.
It's funny, as a kid, because I was born in 61, and the common game for kids in those days was war games.
Yeah.
Right? And we were rough in San Francisco. Oh my God, we got seriously hurt, and sometimes through rocks. I mean, I've got stitches from my brother, one of my brothers right here. And yeah, it's as you're describing this, to survive all those injuries as a child. Did you ever get an EEG of your brain, or?
Oh, I've since had them, but I also survived drinking lighter fluid.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I have to laugh.
It's okay. I know. I was the kid that they made the childproof cap for.
Right.
I had my stomach pumped. I was at 2 when I had my stomach pumped. And of course, they tumble off the barbecue at 3. And a number of other falls and breaks, and I haven't broken any major bones. But,
wow.
It's kind of a miracle I'm here. And in the neighborhood I grew up in was very rough and tumble, and we would dig the forts. We had like a half acre behind us, and when the grass would grow, you get these long plumes of grass. So you could grab the grass and then throw it, and it would look like a meteor flying through the sky.
Right, with the dirt trail, yeah.
The dirt clods. And the best part was, if it hit you, it generally broke up. So it was relatively safe. But occasionally there was a bit of a rock in one of those. And so, we did what we did. And, we had all the rules. We set everything up.
Oh, I remember dirt clods. Wow. My favorite place was the nurse's office, and pretending I was wounded and having the girls treat me. Mm. And sometimes we would get in fights, and the whole game would stop because all the boys wanted to be in the nurse's office. Wow, that's amazing. So you started having visions very early. I mean, I got knocked out in San Francisco on one of those steep hills, crashed on my bike. I woke up 4 hours later with all these people in white, and I was covered in head to toe in injuries and scrapes and abrasions, and I don't remember a thing. I didn't have a vision like you did. So,
Well, again, it's been the biggest thing about the insights that I have was accepting them. When I saw, I was 5 years old, and it was just, lights out, and all of a sudden I look over at the wall in my bedroom, and it was like 5,000 snakes writhing across the room. And no matter where I looked at it, it would still be there. If I closed my eyes, it wouldn't. I'd open my eyes and I could see this. And needless to say, at 5 years old, it was like that scene out of Indiana Jones where the guys, Indiana falls into the tomb and all the snakes are down there.
right, right.
So I was pretty freaked out, and I screamed. My dad came in. I said, "Dad, there's snakes." And he turns the light on. I said, "Oh no, snakes in here, Dad." He turned the lights off, and then we come back. And so I just completely suppressed that, and I forgot about it for years.
You know what kind of snakes they were? Or?
Well, it was more what I was trying to describe was energy flow. So I was literally seeing live meridians, energies of the earth, all this stuff. Like literally imagine sticking your head in a river and watching all the material coming and going. So it wasn't literal snakes of like cobras and pythons and that kind of thing, but just the movement. And it was so like after an explosion, you see the cloud and the fire and the flames, and everything's in motion. But it was completely across my field of vision. So again, that was so uncomfortable to me. Again, I just shut it down. It was not till many years later that again, it reawakened in me during the massage class. When I'd be working on someone, I would start to see their life story unfold. One of the first women I worked on, she was probably in her then late 50s. And the image that I was working on her, I saw this little girl running through the field, and I see the barn, I see the wheat or whatever's growing, and I see a man chasing her into the barn. And so I'm getting this whole download that this woman, as a little girl, had been abused by one of the farm hands. And so I just kind of like slowed down for a minute, took a deep breath, and I said, "By the way, where did you grow up?" And she said, "Oh, I grew up on a farm." And it was like, wow. But I didn't have a mentor to talk this through. It just, OJT, it was just, with every session, something that could come up differently.
See that, you could see the actual event.
Oh, indeed. In fact, now that's almost 30 years ago now. Well, 32 years ago. So let me bring this forward to today. I was working with a client in England, and she was, her energy work is coming on, and it's wonderful to see these individuals who are coming or blossoming, and it's the time that they're coming on. And I'm what is called a gatekeeper. So I am the individual that helps open the doorways, open the portals. And I do that because I get the goosebumps. And so that I help the person see who they really are. And so we were talking, just chit-chatting like now. And I said, I was in England, and the one thing I remember about England is when we went to the Tower of London. I'd never been there, I'd only seen pictures. We walked in, and there's a big gate to the left, so I turned left. And then it was like this huge blanket came over me, and it was frightening. And I go, what just happened? So now I turn to my right, and there's a big sign there, says, "This way to the torture room."
Oh, wow.
And so I got this whole big download of all the energy and the pain and the suffering that was occurred in that very building. Though hundreds of years ago, there's still souls stuck there.
Really? They're still actually.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, that's all part of the royal family dynasty that, exorcism would be putting it very mildly. So my client today, he said, "Oh, it's so funny, Justin. I went there as a kid, and I felt so bad, I started crying. I couldn't handle the place. I couldn't handle the energy." And trying to explain that to the teacher at 5 or 6, 7 years old, it's just like, okay, the teacher didn't have words to interact. And so through this process, and as she starts to talk, again, I see all these doors opening up. And then I say, this is why you're stuck. You are still connected to that pain, that death, that,
They're still identifying with the resentment.
and the minute I said that to her, she just started sobbing. She felt it. She got the release she was seeking. And for me to sit there and watch that in real time is such an honor.
Wow. Well, that's a real gift you have, Justin. It reminds me, I mean, I've had these kind of experiences occur in my life, but I can't say that I could put my hands on somebody and I could see. You know, I actually experienced the murder of a very close friend of mine. Her name is Nancy Pfister. From a distance, she was murdered in her home in Aspen, Colorado, and I had spent many weeks in that home with her, and I spent many years in Aspen. And I was living here in Canada, and in the middle of the night, my first daughter was having trauma in her bowels, and she couldn't have a bowel movement, so she kept everybody up for hours at night. So exhausted, like I don't know what time it was. I think I went to bed early that night because it had been days since I could sleep. And as I was falling asleep, I hear Nancy screaming. I hear the whole thing, but I can't see it. But part of me is seeing it, and part of me knows who really killed her. I mean, the story was all over the news. And it's I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Eyes of Laura Mars with Faye Dunaway. And it's a very similar thing where she sees through the eyes of a killer, and she sees it happening. She doesn't know why. But your gift is extremely useful. I mean, it's incredibly useful. It could unlock tremendous mysteries if you were able to do this to key people. You know, literally to get your hands on key people who have hidden there's certain pivotal points in our history where we don't know what the answers are.
And it goes so much beyond that. It goes so much beyond that. When we think of this lifetime, this is just, one pebble on the string of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
In the work and the practice that I do, one of the sessions I have that's called Soul Convergence.
Mm-hmm.
And throw away all beliefs about hypnosis, numerology, astrology, all that stuff. Just throw it out the window. This is way beyond the Akashic records. This is the hologram of the universe that we contain within ourselves. And so as I walk a person into that sacred place, before our conversation started today, I walked over to my altar, I lit the incense to bring the masters to be present so that I can do the work. And that as part of that, opening that door, opening that portal, and opening that gateway, it allows the individual I'm working with to see their own energies, to see their own conditions, to see their own merriment, sadness, and everything in between. So many times people say, well, I can't really imagine or visualize. And then they dive into a session with me, and all of a sudden all this stuff is coming up, and it's like, oh my God. I had a full-on exorcism a few days ago where the person was coughing and spitting out and just all kinds of crud, working through it, and just digging down.
Are you working with them in person or through the internet?
Either way. Generally, I'll work with someone in the internet. I've been doing it this way for so many years. And the best part is in your own work with energy, it's distance is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
well, that would be interesting. I have to talk to you about an idea I have in regards to that later.
I'd be happy to.
So from there with this gift, and you're in the VA, and then when did you leave the VA and start like a new practice and a new approach to healing?
Well, again, it's been a very interesting road and journey. So after 5 years, I was offered a position at an aerospace firm building models again. And so having looked at allopathic medicine for all of its benefits, but also all of its deficits, and seeing just this repeated cycle of drug for symptom, symptom for drug, and one led to another, but no one getting well. It's like this model is broken. So when the other position came up in aerospace, so went to that, and it was all as much work as I could do. And it was, the nice thing about it, the project when I was working, I could step away from it, and I didn't have to worry about the call bell. So for me, it was very calming. It was also something I could focus on because I was going through a rather bitter divorce at the time. So moving forward, another position came up at internationally recognized art and design college, Art Center College of Design in Pasadena.
Mhm.
So all the things I learned over all the years, all the hands-on work, the nursing skills, everything came into this perfect storm because I could then help these young college students to build their dreams. The next car design, the toaster, or make a movie. If an artist came in and needed to make, the stretcher bars or make a frame, we got to do it all. So I did literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of projects with students that all my skill set. And when a student got sick or was having major anxiety, and I'd reach for the brown paper bag, just breathe in and here, okay. Or when one of our other staff, they were having shortness of breath, I was the first one called with the oxygen bottle, keeping them going till the paramedics arrived. So it was like my own perfect briar patch. And during this phase of my life, I started picking up what the students needed before they'd even open their mouth. They would walk in and start to say, and I just list all the stuff they needed to do. And they'd look at me, how do you know this? And it's like, well, practice, but I also have a good intuition about what it is. To the point, one student was standing next to me, and I'm operating the big bandsaw, cutting wood. And I stopped for a minute, and I turned to her and I said, your sister's going through a rough time right now. And it's going to be really, between now and Friday, because this was like a Monday or Tuesday, and I said, it's going to be really tough right now until about Thursday, but by Friday she'll be fine. And she just looked at me and go, oh, whatever. And he said, yeah, my sister is going to the hospital this week. And so we'll say a prayer for her. And so sure enough, she came in the following Monday and she said, you so called it. You're exactly right. And precognition for me has been a wonder and a challenge of when to speak up and when not to speak up. A family member on my wife's side of the family, I foresaw her having children at 21. At that time, she was 16, wanted to go to college and set the world on fire. And it just popped in and said, no, I see you having, a baby at 21. And sure enough, the family was really upset by that. And how can you tell her that and all this stuff? And it's like, okay, I'm the messenger. So about 4 months before her 21st birthday, the family let me know that she was going to have a baby on her 21st birthday or thereabouts. So it was about the time that she was turning 21 that she was having the baby. And it's what it is. One person
So is this consistent that you can do this? I mean,
sometimes it shows up. Like that one just showed up.
So you can't necessarily sit down with anybody and do this, or can?
Most people they say they have a guide. I have an entire committee. I've worked with engineers. I've worked with other clinicians. I've worked with people. I was holding bottles of nutritional supplements and was telling the manufacturer what they did without even looking at the label. So it's interesting. It always is a question leads to the answer. Do I go out of my way to tell people what are going on? Absolutely not. That would be very rude and invasive. For example, I was on Lisa Gar's The Aware Show in Los Angeles. And so kind of jumping backward even further in time, and which was completely unexpected. People try to get on that show 2 and 3 year waiting list. But
really, is that bad? I was with her in when she first started. She was just starting her show and she interviewed me. That's quite a long time ago.
Yeah, this would have been 2005. Yeah, it was October 2005. And it just all kind of fell into place. So that how the question gets asked, how the circumstance of the person that's needing the answer is kind of what kicks it off. So I can't always predicate knowing beforehand, but again, if it comes up. So I was with
that movie with Matt Damon recently where he's a psychic. He puts his hands on somebody and he can see their trauma. He can see their life. And the backdrop is the tsunami in Southeast Asia that happened years ago. Have you seen that film?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you got to see it because it reminds me of you.
Oh, thank you. Well, Tanya, who was Lisa's producer, she and I went out to run some errands, and Tanya Jenkins at the time. So we're standing at what then was called a photo booth. And back when people actually still had film, it wasn't that long ago. And so next to us, as we're waiting for Lisa's photos from a celebrity event, this man is standing next to me, and there's all these photos of his sons there. And I look at the photos, and the boy in the picture was like 20. Great health. He's got all these karate trophies, literally filled the room. And I'm looking at this, I look at the guy, and it's like, okay. So that it came in as like teddy bear. Ask the man next to you about the teddy bear. And so I turn to him and I say, I know this may sound like an odd question, but did your son have a teddy bear? And he just froze. He just froze. He looked at me and it's like, oh my God. This kid had 3 black belts and 2 different martial arts, had traveled all over the world, and he had a teddy bear collection. So in that moment of grace that my guide spoke to me, that right then and there, he needed to hear something. He was going through these photos of his son who had recently died in a freak accident. So in a sense, he was reaching out, and I happened to be there.
How old was his son when he died?
20, 21.
Oh my God.
So in that sense, it's like, if I'm close enough in proximity to someone and the answer is important, it will come up and I will share it. One time we were at church and this woman was just standing there, and I don't know why, but I just went with what I was guided to do. And I just walked over and put my hand, one on her back, one on her chest. And I just stood there for a moment, got quiet, and she burst into tears. She'd just been given a 6-month terminal cancer diagnosis. And she'd been holding it all in, keeping. But once I did that, just a sense of it's going to be okay. And she was crying, and I didn't know until she started.
What do you think allows you to do this, Justin? Like what is allowing you to see so clearly, through their, the visage of the person on the outside into their inside and their, what's going on there? Is it a gift, that comes from a relationship you have with the master? Or when you say you call in the masters, like the masters are present, like can you name some of the masters, and are they opening a gateway for you?
When I happen to be out in public, I've had people call me while I'm driving down the freeway and asking what's going on. So if I tap in, I tap in. It's just like, give me a minute, and I drop into it. But I can't live there all the time because I still have to eat and breathe and sleep and bills. And so
you go into that function of your life, and then you're able to, I fully understand.
So in many ways, the nursing practice and all the other things that I've done, again, thousands and thousands of hours of being able to focus on one thing and then drop everything and move to something else. And for my own near-death experiences. So Master Yu would have said it was because of merit. Whatever I have done in past lives. And also, I've always been a seeker. I've always been a seeker. I've always been open to all possibilities. When I was a kid, I wanted to be Will Smith, and that robot and I would have headed all over the galaxy. I wanted to sign up when I was 20, I wanted to be a Jedi Knight because I just so resonated with the idea of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And now, some 40 years later, I get to live the life of Obi-Wan Kenobi. So it's not quite like
funny, you look so much like my Uncle Brian. I'm really kind of astounded. You have almost the same face. He became a Superior Court judge in Canada. My mom was an attorney in California, and she since passed away a couple of years ago. But as I'm looking at your face, I'm going, oh my God, he looks like my Uncle Brian. And I wonder. Because there are people who claim to have abilities. There are people that it just spontaneously happens. When I was a kid, the only vision I could see is I would go to bed at night in this pitch black room, and it would seem like the sun was out when I closed my eyes. This bright sun was in my head. But then I learned meditation by the age of 17. I was meditating every day. every single day. I've been meditating for over 42 years.
Mm.
And then in 1994, I had this blinding apparition of Christ. He appeared to me in a very difficult moment of my life, where I was bankrupt and living in a tent on my father's property in Topanga, California. And on that day, from that day forward, my inner eye was so open, I could see the dead, I could see spirits perfectly clearly, like not fuzzy and, you know, trying to make them out. They were perfectly real. And that lasted for 14 years, and then it stopped. But with that ability, I couldn't say like what you're doing. I couldn't touch somebody and get a message from a deceased relative. I would just see them.
Well,
And I've seen interesting beings from other star systems, and I've seen masters, and then I saw Christ again, and then I saw him again, and I wrote a book about it. But I didn't have an ability like what you're describing, where you can touch somebody and know. There was one case in it was in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles, where this child had gone missing in the ocean, and there was a search party. I saw the helicopters going up and down the highway, and I called. There was a friend of mine on the phone. Her name was Trish, and I said, let's pray for her. And they called off the search, and the next morning, she was on the beach. The next morning,
wow.
and they asked her, what happened? And she goes, I don't know. I just fell asleep in the water, and I woke up on the shore the next day. So that was a miracle in the sense that we called upon for a miracle for this girl. And she was, I forget, it was in the papers. I forget how old she was.
Sure.
And nobody will know that I had just seen Christ. I was just with him. And I said, I can't ask for anything for myself. It has to be something for somebody else. And it would happen.
But you see, that's part of it. I will share with you this, probably 10 years ago, maybe a little longer. Do you remember the young 12, 14-year-old decided to sail a boat around the world by herself?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Okay, well, I got a phone call out of the blue, and they said the young girl had gone missing. Justin, can you help us? And I said, and I just got quiet. And I said, I see the boat's been dismasted. It's still afloat. She was hit by a rogue wave or something, just, she's hurt, but she's alive, and you'll be finding her within the next 48 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and they said, thank you so much. Didn't even give me a phone number or anything, and just hung up. And it's like, okay. And then sure enough, I found out a few days later, they found her just as I described. And it's that kind of thing, that it's the confirmation. Regardless of what I share, it's the confirmation that means the most to me. Getting back to, when this all really came together, I'd started studying with a Buddhist master, Master Yu Desham Duran, and he was the 49th lineage holder of Harmony Dharma, or Harmony Buddhism. And so.
And where does that originate? Is that a Chinese Buddhism? Or?
It originally from Tibet, went to China, and then going back about 500 years ago, this particular sect was becoming so popular with the people, healing people. They were getting all kinds of donations, and people were appreciating. They were building temples. And so the first emperor was supporting all this because he could see the truth of it. And then his son became jealous of all the monks doing the work they were doing, because he was not the anointed one. The emperor had none of these abilities, even though they were willing to teach him. So he shut down the entire Dari Rulai sect. And so
jealous.
Tore the temples down.
Oh my God.
And then many of them went into the hinterlands. And this is
Why did they turn the temples down? Was that is that in any way related to the timing of when the Dalai Lama was in exile and moved out of Tibet into India?
No. This is 400 or 500 years ago.
Oh, that's 400 or 500 years ago. Okay.
So, and when the monks that were teaching this practice, of which there's many, many forms of healing, that's when Reiki survived into Japan. And Reiki is just 1% of the entire healing codes that Master Yu was teaching. And this is something I do teach. This is the representation of the vest that I wear that he gave me to teach the teachings, to keep it alive and active. In fact, one of the things I would love to demonstrate for you as part of the practice is healing water. So if you happen to have a cup of tap water there, great. So, okay, so drink out, just taste it, just so you get that flavor.
It's just really blowing my mind because I saw this perfectly clearly that you were going to do this, and I haven't read any of the questions that Chiro sent. And I said, we're going to do this experiment with water where I'm going to taste before and after. I saw this. I swear to God.
Okay, so just taste it. So you taste the chemical or whatever is coming through, unless you happen to have a well water.
It's
Okay.
well water, yeah.
Okay, so just put the water down now. And again, this is a taught practice. I can teach you to do this, or I can teach anyone willing to learn, which is part of the bigger practice, Medicine Buddha. And it is through these practices, it fully brought my skills into full flower. So that's when I started seeing broken bones and seeing people, what was going on physically. And in the work, it's been very nuts and bolts. This organ, this bone, this particular place in your body is the problem. And now 15 years on, I'm now seeing much of the more esoteric issues of behind the story of what's going on. Working with my client today, not only was she physically, chemically poisoned, other abuses in her history, but then also that we need to eliminate heavy metals and detox. But then that's when these other issues, especially like the Tower of London I was describing, came into the picture. So now I'm doing the whole landscape rather than just one part. And again, it's a great honor to be able to be doing this. And every time a client sends me an email or thanks, or it just is still that wow factor and more. So what I'm going to do now is purify the water. So I'll be quiet for probably about 30 seconds. Okay, so just hang on there. Okay, try it now.
Okay. It's different.
How did it take for you, Shiraz?
Hi, it's different too.
I'll say this, it's more velvety and soft. It's softer, whereas before it was much crisper and it's like it kind of softened it and smoothed it.
It's a really good description. Similar, like it felt hard before, and yeah, now softer. And
yeah, crisp. It was crisp and sharp before, and now it's got this smooth.
Yeah, very fluid.
Fantastic. And again,
and this is well water, from a glacier. Like we're sitting underneath a massive glacier. So to see, I mean, water, we used to distribute a movie called Water, the Great Mystery that really looks at, water restructuring with intention. And all the experiments showed that there is a profound change in the water. And in one experiment we used, really pretty much junky Russian tap water and exposed it to a recording of the NASA Sound of the Sun, and they photographed it cryogenically frozen before and after, and the restructuring was phenomenal restructuring using the sun's magnetic energy field.
I haven't heard of that exact process, but I can only imagine it's amazing. And so to be able to do this without machinery, without technology, from something that's been handed down 2,500 years. Master Yu was a living Buddha master. I saw him bring water out of thin air. I saw him heal individuals' illnesses. And everything he did was for the only reason was to teach it to others because he felt time was short. He could have lived in a monastery the rest of his days and been very fine, but he knew. And the backstory is he was a multimillionaire in China. He had 1,500 employees. They were making things. He was very wealthy. And so his teacher walked into his office one day and basically said, "Are you ready to wake up?" And Master Yu literally kind of woke up and literally walked out the front door of his factory and never looked back. Caused all kinds of strife with the family and all kinds of issues. Another story. But he foresaw what he needed to do. You can see over my shoulder here, the reflection of him on my other screen, that he knew that he had to get this out of the monastery into the hands of people who could use it. Because this is now like 1990, 1985, 1990, and that he foresaw SARS coming. He foresaw Fukushima coming. And part of it is, I'll show you my book. This is my own personal copy. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So he put many of his teachings into this book, of which this is what I teach from. So this is my manual, my Bible might be too strong a word, but this is a practice. Again, anyone can learn to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm teaching this practice starting September 5th. This it's a master class and literally a mastery class for healing self, healing others, and creating energy fields for protection, for energy, clearing the ghosts, the contagious diseases, and more. And again, this is just kind of the first step of which many things that I have taken on, have learned, and is part of it. So the more I learn, the more I'm able to do. So like that great poem by Rilke, the poet, is like, I continue to be beaten by greater and greater angels.
Mm-hmm.
So as my energy comes up, as I understand more, as I've been through so much, that I'm given more opportunity to practice and do the good work. And that to me, what it's all about. You know, it's, am I making millions of dollars? No. Am I having millions of hours of fun? Yeah. It's sometimes I'm on the ground.
It's more important, isn't it? Because when you see your teacher walking out of a factory, you realize the immense responsibility that is. It's immense responsibility to hold excess wealth, because people have excess wealth. It can go up and then it can go down. I mean, you're responsible for so many employees, and it's an enormous commitment. I'll call it a commitment, not a burden, but there's a moment when you want to be free. And you know, my experience of meditation now is intense bliss happens within 20 minutes of sitting almost every day when I sit now. And that to me, with my children, I'm raising children very late in life, because I've got a girl who's going to turn 5 on September 11th and a girl who's going to turn 10 on October 23rd. And I just, that is my wealth. My wealth is that bliss state, and sharing it, and sharing it with my children and others, and conquering the perception of suffering. You know, suffering is a perception. It's hard to understand it until that immense meditation state awakens within you, and you realize this is the real wealth, is here. Justin, we're coming to the top of the hour, and I want to do another interview with you about your approach to coronavirus, because last time on the phone we were talking about the role of magnesium and oxygen retention and vitamin C, and that relationship. And also, you know, we talked also how we met. We talked about the masks and the debate, you know, about masks, and I had found 3 studies on the National Institute of Health that definitely showed oxygen being compromised, and also CO2 building up. And then nobody has done long-term studies on children wearing a mask all day in school. And I'm very concerned about the development of children's nervous system, brain, and chemistry wearing a mask all day. And I really don't think children should be wearing masks for 6 hours a day until there's a study, or maybe there's an improvement in a new type of mask. And I just saw some news about much more sophisticated masks coming out that really let airflow. I mean, these fabric masks. Tell me this just really quickly. I mean, do you know anything about fabric masks being designed for use beyond an hour?
No, and again, my own personal use, I've used respirators, I've used the N95, I've used cloth, I've used synthetic, whatever happened to be available for the job. I've had the full hazmat suit on with the big respirators, field. So the one thing that I knew, there was like a expiration time. Whenever I put the mask on, I know I can do this for 20 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, or whatever the period is. But I would never imagine until now wearing that mask for all day long. And
What is the period on an N95?
Pardon?
What's the period for an N95 that it's effective?
You know, I don't know if anybody's actually published that. But one of the criteria is that when you have that breather valve out the front, that you're inhaling, so you're protecting yourself from outside of you. But then it's that blowing out through the breather valve, you're still creating and letting things go. But let me kind of take this up one notch. Is that it's really about oxygenation.
Right.
And so it's about safety. And so in the planet, we know that the oxygen levels are dropping. So part of this bigger picture is that because people have had so many chemicals and toxins, and we can get into a whole chemtrail discussion, that all of these things have entered into our bloodstreams. So our general oxygen level, even though the little pulse ox might say 98%, but it's all the other myriad of factions that are helping the person function and brain and think. Because hypoxia, which is a big issue for divers, if they start seeing things, you know, not the bends, but rapture of the deep, it's the same thing. It's an oxygen deprivation. Now, one of the things I found, and this is one of the products out there, is called double helix water. And this material is the purest form of water ever developed. And it actually causes the blood, the red blood cells to kind of move apart, much like magnets at polar opposites. So it will actually help transport more oxygen. And Olympic athletes are using this, ultra marathoners are using this, all the people that need lots of oxygen. So to have those circumstances of kids in classes, if they were to make a gallon of this, which is like one of these fits a gallon, that would take care of every kid in the class to bring their oxygen levels set.
Oh, that's really interesting, Justin. So that might supplement them. Yeah, I mean, I trained for high altitude skydiving in Edwards Air Force Base as a civilian. And in that chamber, that rectangular chamber, we all had masks on, and they gave us tasks, clipboards with tasks and color charts. And stage 1 hypoxia puts people in a stupor, which means you become stupid, but not in a negative sense, because it's not your fault. You're being deprived of oxygen. And then stage 2, it's interesting when you look at all the guys and some women in the room, in the chamber. At stage 2, some people just start nodding off. They can't complete the task. 1 + 1 is 2. So really simple math. And then in stage 3, your color chart, the color starts to fade, and about 1/3 of the room is nodded over. And that the other 2/3 of us are still active, but I was kind of shaky at stage 3. And stage 4, about 2/3 of the people in the room have nodded over. I started seeing spots and getting those tingles, like those buzzy little tingles everywhere. And I can the color is about 75% gone. And stage 5, I nodded out. Now, I wasn't unconscious, like blacked out. I was aware that I was slumped over, but I couldn't do anything. And that's what concerns me about mass, is that no two humans respond the same to different stages of hypoxia. And to qualify for high altitude skydiving and high altitude pilots, they have to be in that upper third of the class. And it's not their fault if they're not, it's just how they're wired. But a product like that, and you also mentioned oxygen is improved by having a good amount of magnesium.
Absolutely. But what about, let's take it up to, you know, in the background of engineering, let's go HVAC name, heat to vacuum, heat and air conditioning. So think about if we were to make the rooms where these kids were being active. 1, we put full spectrum daylight light bulbs in.
Right.
That's going to wake their eyes up. 2, we have air scrubbers to pull the air like every, you know, minute or 2 minutes. It's pulling all the air down to just like in a clean room. I know this is a wish list, but then that air is going down, so whatever they're breathing is being pulled to the floor. 3, they're bumping that oxygen up in that room to 20, 21%, even 22%.
That's optimal. That's optimal.
Yeah. And so now you could even go maybe 22. I'm getting goosebumps off this. So now you've created a clean room state that's antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, and the kids are doing their thing. And so whatever drop that they have just by breathing through the mask is more than overcome. Kids are more alert, more comfortable. Have you ever done hyperbaric chambers? I mean, like for.
Oh yeah, I've had to go in one of those before. I
Yeah.
found it very difficult to be,
Well,
because I'm claustrophobic.
Yeah.
But I get if I'm not in control of my exit, I'm claustrophobic. But if I'm in control of it, yeah, I went in one of those, and for me it was really hard. It's really hard.
well, that claustrophobia that you're feeling is also part of the connection to the Christ. And we will talk about that at another time. But again, is that whatever we could do to make the environment of especially classrooms, which should be considered kind of a sacred space for kids to learn, that for all these trillions of dollars that have gone out around the country to businesses and everything, that we could open up a few derelict factories and have all of the stuff. We could have it in place, ready to go by now. You know, there are oxygen generators, there are air scrubbers. All the technology exists. There's nothing new here.
Yeah, and what if one kid, okay, let's say they're all forced to wear their masks, just starts breaking down? Because, you know, and I know with hypoxia, and of course they were all, I think I was in my early 30s when I did that test, and I skydived from 30,000 feet. And when you skydive from 30,000 feet, a whole bunch of other problems happen with the inner ear, and
Yeah.
some of the pilots, one guy jumped out of the plane, this is over Davis, California, and he still had the hose connected to the plane. You're supposed to disconnect your hose, turn on your 1 minute oxygen bottle on your leg, jump out. He jumped out with the hose and tore it right off. He had no oxygen all the way down. And you know, luckily that guy lived, because I guess you can hold your breath for a minute or so. But the point is, you're gonna, what I predict is you're gonna see different kids responding to that mask at different rates. Some kids are gonna have a panic attack. Some kids are going to start freaking out because they know they're not getting enough.
It's going to deal with blood sugar. What did they eat that morning?
Right.
Were they eating lots of sugar, which is going to crash their immune system? Were they eating greens and vegetables? So from my own experience, my invention Wonder Weight, which is a spinning object that works, it's 2 weights on a shaft, and you get it spinning around and around. And so by getting it spinning, you're flexing the muscles 250 times per minute. And so I had one kid who was a 6th grader, and I could maybe do it on my best day, 6 or 7, maybe 8 minutes. She went at 20 minutes and was still going, because she went to a point that she was just barely getting by, but then she went into this kind of new age of sustaining. And I realized, because she's so young, is that her body's ability to recover and capture and hold oxygen is much better than you and I. Simply because, again, we've had all these other neurological, biological affronts to the cellular structure. So I really feel that, yes, there'll be an issue. It may not be as much for you and me. And anything that they could do in the environment of the classroom, again, even if they just brought an oxygen generator in, they would put out, 20 liters an hour. That's a lot of oxygen in a room. At a level you don't have to worry about fire and explosion.
If you can get up to 21%. I looked at a chart, I think I posted it on Facebook, at different elevations on the planet. These are the percentage values of oxygen. And of course, sea level is optimal, and kelp and seaweed is producing oxygen. But what about ions? Like if you look at negative and positive ions in a room, are you aware of the health impacts of being in a room that has a proper imbalance of ionic energy? And an ion is an atom with an extra negative or positive charge on it, and most atoms are net zero. For example,
what you're describing is a department store, like Broadway, Macy's, whatever major Target. When you walk into those places, you can just feel the shift, because all the electric lights, all the physical trappings has a lot of positive ions. What I don't understand is the interior designers, engineers haven't figured out that just by adding negative ions to counteract
you
that.
need both. You need both. I have an ion meter here, and I've checked where you get a lot of ions from fire, like especially a natural fire. You'll get an incredible increase in your ionic energies. And with ions, of course, you also, with my work, it's frequencies, and that we're bathed in all the time. We're all surrounded by frequencies, microwaves, natural earth resonant and planetary frequencies and sun frequencies and star frequencies, and we throw those out of balance.
Well,
And
yeah.
yeah,
So what I want to say is, again, for classrooms, what would be the least expensive thing to do to help make any classroom or workspace? Take a big steel rod or copper rod, drive it into the ground 6 feet,
yeah,
and bring some copper wires into the classroom, and then have grounding mats under each kid's foot.
mm-hmm.
And so by then creating that negative ion blanket, and the body would then normally start shedding all the positive ions, would be another way to boost the immune system. And I know you know all about earthing and grounding, but
Sure.
this would also be a really low cost.
I know how to block radiation too. I've done so many tests with my, different meters I have. And basically, like, my office is separate from the house, and it's got metal siding all over it. But metal won't block electromagnetic fields or microwaves until you ground it. So the second I drill a hole in that steel sheet and send it to deep copper ground, nothing's passing through that wall.
Exactly. And so again, especially kids or an office environment, and on and on and on. I do not recommend people would use the ground that comes with your electric outlet as a ground, because there's so much backscatter radiation.
Right. There's so much dumping going through that line. Right.
So, but as for a classroom, on a normal day, let's say COVID is coming on. So if they were to create grounding spots, or like the chair that the kids sat in was properly grounded. Let me be really clear, and you know what I'm talking about. The big copper.
Well, do you need skin contact, or do you think it goes through the clothing?
Well, there's always that insulation factor. So ideally, when I work on my computer, which is once in a blue moon now, I have a Mac. I have like a little grounding rod. I put it on my arm, and I can plug it onto the computer, so I'm grounded to the computer.
Oh, good.
So
yeah, my computer is Ethernet. Like I have a cable running out into the ground, and so my radiation in here, if I check my microwaves, is nothing.
Excellent. Wow.
It's zero. Like you can see, and I've got a huge computer screen. It's the size. It's a TV, but I'm 8 gigahertz, up to 8 gigahertz, and that's another way to get rid of is to use Ethernet. I think children should all be on Ethernet. I have my daughter's room on Ethernet, but yeah.
Well, it's the simple things that technologies exist. That earlier device you're describing that would be essential for recognizing any kind of EMF or biowarfare sensors they put around the city. At the same time as you were talking about it, yes, and if you then hooked it up to your frequency generators, you could be taking the bugs right out of the air in real time. And in a perfect world, we would have long since made this. The work of Royal Rife has long since been ignored, and so much more. There's just so many ways, very simply, if we really wanted to heal the planet and heal the people on the planet, to make better decisions. Well, this is what it's really boiling down to, is that people today are becoming more and more stupid at 1,000 miles an hour. That's about the speed of the Earth rotation.
They don't think for themselves. They just believe what they're told, and they don't question authority.
But let's take this up a notch. What is one of the reasons we don't think well is because we have lowered oxygen levels.
Right. That's what I mean. That's hypoxia stage 1, a stupor. In stage 2, it's hard to complete tasks. You get nervous, like you're doing like 2 + 3. They gave us this clipboard. They're dumb questions, but in stage 2, you have a hard time.
And so when people are starting to feel that hypoxia, even though they don't know it, and how do you put someone into a state of hypoxia in a room? You get them angry. Mm-hmm. And so they start to, they don't breathe as deeply. They get them angry, and that puts them further into that state of stress. And then the endorphins go out the window, the corticosteroids go up, and everything else. And so talk about a rally where you're getting people angry is it feeds on itself. And that's, if you will, the in that group.
Well, certain frequencies will activate the hyperactive part of the brain. Like you get into the upper alpha, beta, gamma, upper beta, Like the moon, the frequency of the moon, the wavelength of the moon, the speed of light divided by the wavelength of the moon is 27 point something hertz. So that's why we can't sleep at night, because we're getting a lot of upper beta, we're getting close to gamma, and that's a highly active part of the brain to stimulate it. And that also tells us how planetoid bodies can, you know, when they're lit up with all that electromagnetic energy, they transfer it to us. Like when Mercury goes retrograde, Mercury is 20 hertz, and 20 hertz, when you lose that 20 hertz source from Mercury, which is where we cognitively start hearing rated 20 hertz, that's Mercury. Mercury's the messenger. That's where you start hearing messages, and then we lose it 4 times a year because Mercury goes behind the sun. And I find that really interesting evidence that we are beings of frequency. We do respond to frequencies, and there too much hyper frequency on the brain can lead to anger and emotional outbursts.
And that's exactly what television and radio and all the media, I mean.
The old TVs were alpha emitters. They emitted alpha waves, and those are actually a form of ionizing nuclear radiation.
Again, you make the point is stuff, as there is a drawback to it. You know, if we get all back to living in the mud huts, you know, there's a plus and minus to that as well. I do actually like to have a bed at night and dry clothing and everything, so that recognizing all this stuff that is affecting us, it's also affecting our choices, our reasoning capability. You wouldn't, you know, my father was a pilot, and, you know, anytime he got in that jet airplane, threw on the oxygen mask above 10,000 feet, and he knew it was there. That was his go-to. And
is that where he started at 10,000?
Well, it depends on what the operational field was. It might come on, but on the flip side of that, one of the things the pilots in the military learned very quickly is that after they'd been on the night on the town drinking like nobody's business.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God, I forgot about that.
So first thing they would do is get in their airplane and start sucking down oxygen while they're doing their warm-up. Right. And, you know, the oxygen in the aircraft would last probably 2 to 3 hours.
You have to pre-breathe. We pre-breathed oxygen for an hour before we went up to 30,000 feet and jumped.
Yeah.
You got to get all the nitrogen out of your body. Exactly.
But again, here at sea level, or I'm not at sea level, but at sea level, at that 18 or 90% oxygen, and which means it's 80 plus nitrogen and xenon and all the other stuff thrown in. Because the air that we breathe is not as pure, the water that we drink is not as pure, all of these cofactors are part of the bigger problem that is the elephant in the room. So
but that might be why in Canada and British Columbia, I mean, we have so much forest here, we have so few COVID deaths, even over 4,000 infected. There's not more than 190 something that have died, and most of those had pre-existing health conditions. But almost everybody who gets it here recovers because we have clean water, we have unbelievable water in British Columbia, and we have incredible air. And I wonder if that's a factor. I wonder if that's, when you look at New York, they have incredible water coming out of upstate New York, and they're Atlantic, so they have pretty decent air. It's not as polluted, nothing like New Delhi. If you go to New Delhi, I've been there, the air is brown. But anyway, I think we're out of time today. We're going to have to do a follow-up, and we'll definitely give out your website or any contact information you want for people who listen to this and become interested in you. And I'd love to do a session with you for my wife. I'd like to see what you pick up for her.
I would be happy to, and we can work on some of the blocks and things as well that have held you back, because that's part of it, is that part of what we deal with as healers, as shamans, as mentors, is accepting the gifts. Right. That is always part of
and being empowered by the fact that you have a gift. I have not done that. It's not that I'm trying to be humble, but it's just that I find it hard to speak about the experiences and gifts that I had, that I've been given. And, you know, I started with an intense Buddhist practice, and then it led into my encounters with Christ and Mary Magdalene. And then eventually I started moving into the direction of just infinite God consciousness, and not identifying with a master so much, although I do love them when they show up, all of them. I'm not somebody who believes one religion is right and the other is wrong. And I certainly believe in the enlightenment of the Buddha and the Buddhist system. But now the structure of all religions is, there are certain parts of those structures that are very valuable, that I think are very beneficial. But we argue about structures because they're different.
And that's the thing. Like in this practice, this is a practice. I could be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu. It doesn't matter. And in this practice, it's like, if you will, a vocation. I mean, regardless of what religion a doctor is, you know, he will operate on whoever comes in the room. And that's what I love about that, because Master Yu himself said, whatever religion you were brought up in and your parents are a part of, you are to honor them, to honor that part. Mm-hmm. And this, again, is a practice that it's something I learned to do, much like driving a car. Mm-hmm. And it's a really good car. So that it's the practice. And so all the dogma of how to do it, that religion tends to wrap around to have people only see their particular side of it.
Right, and those religions existed in a different historical period, and there were different. Life was physically different in those periods.
Indeed.
So we don't have to over-identify. The main thing is, I find, is to get the consciousness, and once you get the consciousness, you can express it in your own unique way, any way you want. Anyway, it's been wonderful chatting with you, Justin. Thank you for doing this with us, and we definitely have to have you back, because I sense there's a lot more that we can learn from you and share.
Thank you so much. And if you ever want to do like a live broadcast and have all your listeners, I love to have people just, I try to tell them what's going on before they even ask the question. So,
well, what we're going to be doing is distributing these new videos we're doing with different people to our inner circle. And then once we do that, and then they become familiar with who the different people we're interviewing are, then we can do some live events. Definitely, there's an advantage to a live event, because you can do a transmission like you just did with the water. That was live, right? And so everybody can participate in that. Anyway, thank you very much, Justin. Really wonderful to have you here. I have to go back because my kids are in the house and I heard them screaming, and the house is a little ways away.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about your daughter's Stardust stories.
Oh yeah, they've had incredible experiences. My two daughters, what they've reported is incredible. I'll definitely tell you about those, because now I know you had a lot of experiences as a child, and it's a magical time. Anyway, I've got to run because I just heard them scream. So.